Get ready to experience spine-chilling moments that will stay with you long after you've watched. In this video, we dive into 3 terrifying encounters, from creepy roadside strangers to inexplicable events in isolated places. These real-life horror stories are filled with fear, suspense, and eerie coincidences that will leave you questioning what's really out there in the dark. Buckle up. These stories are not for the faint of heart. You won't be able to forget them. The man in the suit. While living in New York, I had 2 job interviews lined up in North Carolina. It seemed like a great opportunity for a fresh start. My current job was miserable, and these new roles offered the chance for a better salary, excellent benefits, and a chance to live in a place with far better weather than New York. To save on travel expenses, I opted to drive down instead of flying. I took the day off work on Friday for the interviews, but the only time I could leave was Thursday night. Since I had to work all day Thursday, I couldn't leave until after my shift ended. I stopped at home briefly to grab my suitcase and other essentials for the trip. After saying goodbye to my family, I began my journey south. It was going to be an 8+ hour drive, with an estimated arrival time of around 2 in the morning. I had booked a room at a Comfort Inn. The first few hours of driving weren't too bad, mainly fueled by a few cups of coffee, which kept me alert for a while. However, when you're already running on fumes, coffee can only do so much. The night before, I hadn't gotten much sleep due to the stress of the interviews, and after a long and busy day at work, the thought of driving nearly 9 hours was exhausting. It was late, when I still had about 2 hours left to go, and the highway was nearly empty. As the night dragged on, my fatigue was getting worse. That's when I saw something unsettling. A man in a suit was standing still by the side of the road, facing my car. As I drove past, I noticed his head slowly turning to follow my car. I muttered to myself, "What the heck?" It was so strange and out of place. The man was just standing there in the dark, in the middle of nowhere at 12:30 in the night. For a moment, I thought about turning around and offering him a ride, wondering why he would be out there like that. But I quickly shook off the thought, trying to keep my mind sharp and stay alert as I continued driving. About 10 minutes later, something truly even more bizarre happened. Another man, also in a suit, appeared by the side of the road, standing in the exact same way, facing the cars. I slowed down, considering stopping to check if everything was okay. But as I glanced in the rearview mirror and turned the car around, the man had vanished. It was as if he had simply disappeared. My heart started racing, and I panicked. I quickly sped up, not wanting to linger any longer, and tried to shake off the unsettling feeling. At this point, I was in desperate need of more caffeine. I pulled off the highway at the next rest area to grab another coffee. As I sat in the parking lot of the gas station, trying to calm myself, I saw him again. The same man. What the hell is this? This time, he was standing under a street lamp facing my direction. I got a clearer view of him, a middle-aged man with short dark hair, clean-shaven, and a neutral expression. He wasn't moving, just staring straight ahead, looking right at my car. My heart dropped, and I didn't want to stick around any longer. I started the car immediately and drove off, still shaken. By now, I was feeling completely exhausted, and I knew I couldn't keep driving. I needed to stop and rest. I pulled off the highway and found a random parking lot. I reclined my seat, hoping to get some rest. But the thought of that man in the suit kept haunting me, and I couldn't shake the fear that I might see him again if I closed my eyes. As I drifted off, a sudden jolt woke me up. My mind was playing tricks on me again. I quickly looked out the windows, terrified of seeing him standing outside. I checked the rearview mirror and froze. For a split second, I thought I saw someone sitting in the back seat. My heart raced, and I instantly thought it was the man in the suit somehow appearing out of nowhere. In a panic, I screamed, scrambled out of the car, and stumbled backward. When I finally gathered the courage to look inside, the The back seat was completely empty. I stood there, my heart pounding, trying to make sense of what had just happened. It was clear now that I had let my exhaustion get the best of me. The hallucinations, the fear, it was all a product of my mind playing tricks on me after hours of driving and the stress of the interviews. Realizing this, I managed to calm myself down, but the fear still lingered. I got back in the car, my heart still racing. Now, I was too wide awake to sleep, so I finished my coffee and pushed through the final leg of the drive. I eventually arrived at the hotel, exhausted and collapsed into the bed. As tired as I was, the adrenaline from the strange events kept me alert, but I was so drained that I passed out immediately. The next day, my first interview was at 11 in the morning. I barely slept, but I felt slightly recharged from the rest. However, as soon as the interviewer walked into the room to greet me, I froze. He looked exactly like the man I had been hallucinating the night before. It was an eerie resemblance, same suit, same features. I could tell that he noticed my reaction. I was so startled that I couldn't mask my surprise, and it threw me off for the rest of the interview. I was nervous, distracted, and couldn't shake the feeling that I was still trapped in a strange dream. The second interview went much better. It was with a woman, and I was able to regain my composure. I felt more confident and grounded in this one, and it paid off. I got the job. I ended up moving to North Carolina and still work at the company to this day. In the aftermath, I discussed the bizarre experiences with my therapist, who suggested that the stress and lack of sleep had caused me to hallucinate the figure of the man in the suit. She explained that my mind had created this image as a way to deal with my anxiety about the interviews. It was a manifestation of my fear, my mind's way of projecting the stress of my situation onto something tangible. While that explanation made sense and offered some relief, it didn't erase how terrifying the whole experience had been. The fear and confusion I felt were very real. Even though I understand now that my mind could have been playing tricks on me, I'll never forget the feeling of seeing that man over and over again in the dead of night. That drive, that strange encounter, and the way it followed me into my interviews will remain one of the most unsettling experiences of my life. The pickup in the snow. One night, I was driving through Clearfield County, Pennsylvania, trying to avoid heavy traffic on my way home. It was already past midnight, and the roads were nearly deserted, which I found oddly comforting. I had my usual podcast playing on the radio to keep myself entertained as I drove along the winding roads. Suddenly, a ding came from my car, signaling that I was running low on fuel. I checked my Maps app for the nearest gas station, and it directed me to one just a few miles up the road, nestled in a remote area. About 5 minutes later, I pulled into the gas station on the right. It was the only parking lot for miles, as this road was surrounded by dense woods. The station itself was a small, unbranded place, one of those generic no-name spots you often find out in the middle of nowhere. I parked next to the pump and noticed a man standing by an old, beat-up pickup truck, filling it up. He looked up as I walked past him and into the small convenience shop. Inside, I grabbed a coffee and paid for my gas in cash. When I returned to my car, I saw the man in the pickup truck finishing up at the pump and getting back in his truck. He drove away just as I was about to leave. I didn't think much of it, but as I pulled out of the station and headed back onto the road, something strange caught my attention. Not even a minute after leaving, I noticed the same truck parked off to the side of the road in the grass, next to the woods. It was turned off and just sitting there. I thought it was a bit odd, but I kept driving. I checked my rearview mirror to see if the truck was going to start up again, but it remained stationary. Feeling a little unsettled, I turned my podcast back on and tried to focus on the road ahead. A few minutes passed, but then I heard another ding from my car. I looked at my dashboard and saw that one of my tires was low. A few seconds later, I began hearing a strange wobbling sound coming from the rear of the car. I opened my window and immediately knew I had a flat. I pulled over to the side of the road to inspect the damage. It was the rear driver's side tire that was flat. I didn't remember hitting anything, and I would have felt it if I had. Then, a thought crossed my mind. What if that guy at the gas station had slashed my tire? I quickly pulled out my phone to search for the number for my roadside assistance service. As I was scrolling, I heard the sound of an engine coming from behind me. I looked up, but strangely, there were no headlights visible. The area around me was pitch dark, with no lights for miles. Suddenly, the engine noise stopped, and the silence was almost deafening. I went to my trunk and grabbed the SOS flashlight my dad had given me as a Christmas gift a few years back. It was a long, bright rod that I used to signal for help if needed. I flicked it on and pointed it down the road. To my surprise, I saw the reflection of headlights coming from a truck about 200 feet away. Parked on the side of the road, it looked like the same old pickup truck from the gas station. A chill ran down my spine as I ducked behind a large bush and a tree, trying to hide myself as I fumbled with my phone to dial 911. I barely managed to press the buttons when I heard the truck start its engine again. The headlights flickered on, and the truck slowly began moving towards my car. Through the bushes, I could hear it stop right next to my car. Then, after a few moments of silence, a voice yelled out, but I knew better than to respond. I whispered into the phone, telling the 911 operator where I was, and explaining that my tire had been slashed and that I thought the man who did it was following me. She asked me a series of standard questions, like describing the man and his truck. I heard the truck door open and close, and I quickly told the operator that the man was getting out of his vehicle. She instructed me to stay hidden if I felt that he was a threat. She then asked if I could see if he was armed, but just as I was about to respond, the call dropped. I had terrible cell service out there, and I knew it was unlikely the call would go through again. I sat there, waiting in a mix of fear and disbelief, hoping she would call back. But it never happened. I could hear the sounds of another car approaching. This time, the vehicle slowed down and came to a stop. Then I heard voices, 2 men talking. I carefully crept toward the edge of the woods to get a better view. I could see the man from the pickup truck talking to someone in another stopped vehicle. The creepy man was explaining something to the other driver, but his story didn't seem to add up. At that moment, panic set in, and I rushed into the road, yelling for help. "I don't know him," I shouted. Both men looked up, startled by my sudden appearance. I turned to the driver of the other truck and explained that the man had slashed my tire and had followed me here. The man in the other truck looked at the creepy man with a disturbed expression, and that's when the slasher denied everything. He claimed he had never seen me before and quickly retreated to his pickup truck. He started backing it up, maneuvering to clear both our vehicles, and drove off. The man in the other truck got out and came over to examine my flat tire. He was genuinely concerned and offered to give me a ride into town. I told him that the police were on their way, and sure enough, just a few minutes later, a police car arrived with its lights flashing. I explained the situation to the officer, and the other driver vouched for me, confirming the events. The officer said he would go to the gas station to review any camera footage that might show the pickup driver slashing my tire. The officer took my information and waited with me until my roadside assistance arrived. The tow truck driver took me to a nearby shop where my dad picked me up. I never heard back from the police officer, so I assumed the footage didn't show anything. Still, what haunted me was how close I came to a terrifying situation. The thought that I might have been abducted that night is something that still sends shivers down my spine. That was the most frightening, unsettling night I've ever had. It's an experience I'll never forget, and it serves as a constant reminder of how quickly things can take a dangerous turn. The Motel on the Edge.
It was the most terrifying and haunting night of my life, one I'll never forget. Even now, the memory sends shivers down my spine. I'm 28 years old, and my boyfriend Todd lives in a different state. We usually take turns visiting each other, But since Todd has his own place and I still share an apartment with my sister, I often end up visiting him more. On this occasion, I was heading to his place for a week during winter break. Being a teacher, I had time off and had packed a lot for the trip. I was driving my old 2009 Hyundai Sonata, a hand-me-down from my sister. By the time I got farther north, the roads were blanketed with snow, and it was snowing harder as I drove. The car wasn't great for snowy conditions, so I had to be extra careful. Earlier, there had been blizzard warnings, but Todd and I agreed it would be better to try to beat the storm that night rather than risk driving through heavier snow the next day. As the storm intensified, I realized I wouldn't make it to Todd's house and would need to stop for the night. After pulling over at a small diner for a quick sandwich and some coffee, I struck up a conversation with the waitress. She strongly advised against driving further and recommended some nearby hotels and motels. As I was finishing my meal, a man sitting at the bar spun around on his stool and chimed in, suggesting a motel just 5 minutes up the road. He claimed it was cheap and decent for a quick night's stay. I found it unsettling how much of my conversation he had clearly overheard. The man introduced himself as Toby, but I wasn't comfortable giving him my real name, so I told him I was Michelle. He lingered, half facing me as he sipped a beer. It struck me as strange who goes to a diner just to drink. Still, I thanked him for the tip and left quickly after paying. By the time I stepped outside, about an inch of snow had accumulated in just 30 minutes. I knew I needed to get off the road soon, so I drove cautiously to the motel. The motel looked as cheap as I expected, but that was fine by me. I didn't need anything fancy. There were only a few cars in the lot, and the place had an unassuming, run-down vibe. At the front desk, I paid about $50 for a room and got a key to one of the downstairs units. After grabbing my belongings from the car, I entered a small, tackily decorated room with a queen-sized bed, red carpet, and outdated wallpaper. It wasn't cozy, but it would do for the night. I tried to FaceTime Todd to let him know I was safe, but I had no cell service. The motel offered Wi-Fi, so I decided to head back to the front desk to ask for the password. As I stepped out into the cold, I noticed a new car had appeared in the parking lot. Someone was sitting inside, but I didn't pay much attention. After all, who really examines parked cars? The front desk worker, uninterested in small talk, pointed to a sign displaying the Wi-Fi password. I typed it into my phone, connected, and hurried back to my room. Once inside, I locked the door and FaceTimed Todd again. Even with Wi-Fi, the connection was terrible. The video kept freezing, and his voice cut in and out. Still, I managed to tell him I was safe. We decided to switch to texting instead. A few minutes later, I heard a noise coming from the bathroom. I glanced over and noticed the bathroom door was shut. Was it shut before? I couldn't remember. I texted Todd, telling him I was freaked out because I might not have locked the door when I ran to the front desk earlier. He asked if the door automatically locked when closed, but I wasn't sure. He told me to check and bring the key with me. I slipped on my shoes and went to test the door. When I opened it, I realized the lock was manual, requiring either the knob to twist from the inside or the key from the outside. But what made my heart stop were the footprints in the snow. An extra set of footprints led from the lot to my door, starting from the direction of that parked car I'd noticed earlier. The car was now empty. Panic overtook me. I slammed the door shut and ran to the front desk, tears streaming down my face as I told the worker someone had been in my room. The front desk clerk didn't seem equipped or inclined to handle the situation. He calmly told me to wait inside while he made a call. I thought he was calling the police, but instead, he spoke in another language, likely contacting a friend or associate. He reassured me to stay put, but I kept an eye on my room from the front desk window. My heart sank as I saw the door to my room open. Out stepped Toby, the man from the diner. Our eyes locked briefly before he hurried to his car, backed out of the lot, and disappeared down the snowy road. I let out a shriek, but the clerk didn't seem alarmed. A while later, the person he had called arrived, a large man who didn't speak English. After a brief exchange, the clerk offered me a different room free of charge to make me feel better. I didn't feel safe at all, but with the storm raging outside, I had no other options. The two men helped me move my belongings to a new room. Todd offered to drive to the motel, but I told him not to risk the dangerous roads in the dark. I locked myself in the new room and barely slept, jumping at every little noise. The next morning, the snowplows had cleared enough of the roads for me to finish my drive to Todd's. I couldn't stop thinking about the night before. I realized the motel clerk probably didn't call the police because he didn't want the motel to get bad publicity. I later called the diner to warn them about Toby, but the whole experience left me shaken. I no longer trust strangers, not after that horrifying night.
Some experiences are so chilling, so unnerving, that they stay with you forever, like a shadow that never fades. From strange encounters on lonely roads, to inexplicable figures in the dark, to the unsettling realization that you're never truly alone. These are the moments that haunt your memory. No matter how hard you try, you can never forget the feeling of being watched, or the terrifying thought that something or someone may be just around the corner. Fear lingers long after the event is over, and some things, once experienced, are never truly left behind. I'll see you at the next episode.